Good morning, Dan and Amy. So how big is it, Mr. President? How big is it, Mr. President? You're supposed to do that in your Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, that's right. How big is it, Mr. President?
You know, the button.
Yeah, the button. He tweeted last night. Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I, too, have a nuclear button, but it is much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works! Exclamation point.
Yeah.
Wow.
Torrent of tweets yesterday from the president.
He's going to be handing out the most dishonest and corrupt media awards of the year on Monday at 5 o'clock.
I'll set my watch accordingly. Subjects will cover dishonesty and bad reporting in various categories.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, that's a
He's
nice
gonna
run
hand
up
out
to the Oscars.
A fake news trophy.
So, yeah, I know the North Korea tweet is sort of silly and juvenile. I don't get it. More interesting to me is the party that Nikki Haley's throwing. And if you condemn the United States, you're not invited. You don't get to come to Nikki Haley's party. Nikki Haley to thank the 65 countries that did not support a resolution condemning President Trump's position on Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, having a little party. But the 9 countries that voted, the 9 countries voted against the resolution, 35 abstained, and 128 nations voted in favor of it. So most of the world not invited. For more on these geopolitical matters, we're pleased to be joined by our friend, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, and author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to be with you again. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. What about the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the reaction that has ensued both at the UN and in majority Muslim countries around the world?
Well, I think it serves to show quite a bit that basically the recognition of what's been a fact in Israel, that Jerusalem is their capital, their Knesset's there, Supreme Court, ministries are all there, and yet we continue for decades to have had campaign rhetoric never bear out during the administrations, be it Bush, Clinton, Obama, or any administrations. And now finally President Trump has made his words of his campaign a reality, and we recognize the capital. And I think what's happened is we've taken off the table something that should have never been on the table, which is the recognition of a capital, the fact that Israel can declare its own capital. And the bottom line is that it shouldn't have been on the peace table because it is not up for negotiation. We will never give in on letting Israel declare its own capital. And there's a lot of confusion happening in the Middle East intentionally. This is not about East Jerusalem. It's about West Jerusalem, and yet Turkey and other Islamist regimes are trying to exploit this to say that this is anti-Islam, et cetera. And the bottom line, I think this will help the peace process eventually because it'll take off the table what should have never been on and let them get to the brass tacks of what are the real issues in the crisis.
Well, if this is such a good idea, why are a number of our allies against it? France, Germany, I mean, the list goes on and on.
Because they have for long been having this sort of inferiority complex to the Islamist governments where they've had a veto in the UN. Why has the UN for so long had so much of its time exploited on issues related to Israel when, in fact, you have real human rights issues in Iran and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and elsewhere? And that's because the Organization of Islamic Cooperation based out of Saudi Arabia loves to demonize the other, and there's no simpler way to do it than to demonize the Jewish state. And it's all based in anti-Semitism, what the State Department itself has called the new anti-Semitism, which is a couching of anti-Israel rhetoric into what is really anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and frankly, you're hearing from Jewish leaders in places like Germany and Western Europe about the rise of anti-Semitism there. To your point, Dr. Jasser, what about related topic, the saber rattling by the president on funding for Palestinians, on funding foreign aid for Pakistan?
Well, it's amazing to me that we've never had this conversation before, which is we hand $1 billion to Egypt, we hand $1 billion to Pakistan and Hamas and other areas in which these enemies of America end up using our money to spread ideologies that threaten us, and yet we never make them pay a price. I sat on the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom, and every year we listed countries that had the worst offenders of religious freedom, and there were statutes in Congress put into place to impose sanctions, and yet every year the White House, Obama and Bush before them, would put in waivers to allow Saudi Arabia and others to bypass those sanctions because of stability and other security issues, when in fact the classic instability was regimes that had ideologies that were an anathema to our own security. So I think it's about time for us to say, you know what, the blank check is not going to be written anymore. And if you're going to get aid from the United States, it's going to come with strings attached, which are sharing our values and at least endorsing human rights in your home countries.
But we normally, history proves we pay we pay our enemies so that we can maintain peace. Don't you agree?
Well, I think that's a facade. I think to say that we maintain peace, that's sort of the albatross that they put above our head and say, well, if we don't do this, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, when in fact they need us a lot more than we need them. And the only downside to this may be oil prices. Bottom line is even at the height of our relationship with Pakistan, they were still harboring bin Laden and others. So this is often a deception. That will, I think, if you push them forward on it, may have a few little skirmishes here or there, but at the end of the day, they need us a lot more than we need them.
Obama's friends in Iran, the Ayatollahs, they in danger, in your estimation, of being felled by a popular revolt?
I pray so. I think there'd be nothing better, as you and I have talked before, than some disruption in the Middle East, and especially you will see the connections that Iran has with Hezbollah, Syria, Assad, and Yemen, and across the region as they become more inwardly focused and for hopefully this Arab Spring now becoming a Persian Spring. We have a president now that at least rhetorically is defending them, which actually can go a long way. You'd be surprised how long seeing America and our leadership from the UN with Nikki Haley and President Trump saying that, we have their back. This is a very different revolt than in 09. 09 was simply in Tehran. This one is in 20 different cities, and it's focused in the cities where the theocrats and the Supreme Council are based, which is in Qom and other major cities. So as long as this doesn't fizzle out with some of the human rights abuses that are happening in the past couple of days with police tanks beginning to mow over people, if this can continue, I think it may be the beginning of the end of the Islamic Republic.
Well, for those of us who don't know, what's life like in Iran? They're talking about, people are hungry for food and for freedom, but the inflation is through the roof. Can you just describe what it's like?
That's a great question because people say, oh, this is simply about, technical issues. No, the chanting for the most part has been about bread, jobs, and liberty. They have no ability to express themselves. 2 days into this revolt, the internet has been turned off. Women are hit on their ankles if their dresses, if their skirts are above their ankles. They aren't allowed to go in the street without wearing a hijab. Gays are thrown from the roof. You can't be publicly homosexual or have any type of speech which is critical of Islam or of the government. So from free speech to the ability to make money, they saw billions coming into the government over the last 2 years after Obama handed back $150 billion, and they're saying in their chants that they see none of that, and that's why they're no longer saying death to America or death to Israel. They're saying death to the regime, death to the dictator, and death to Hezbollah, which I think if you want to, and I'm so disappointed at the left media and the New York Times and CNN and ABC, they're covering it just a little bit, but what better image do you want for Americans to abandon this concept that all Muslims are Islamists than to see tens of thousands of Muslims chanting these slogans, which will forever put away the stereotypes that we're all Islamists or theocrats.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Domestically, in the first quarter of this year, immigration policy is going to be central again to the political discussion in D.C. with respect to the DACA program and what the president will want in exchange, both with respect to border security on the country's southern border as well as this issue of sanctuary city and sanctuary state designations, localities, and even some states like Illinois, like California, refusing to work with federal immigration enforcement. What do you think a sensible compromise on these issues, where the president has indicated he's willing to compromise on DACA? What do you think that looks like?
Well, I think a sensible policy is really what the president has been articulating in the past few weeks, which is we build a wall, we stop the sieve, and we then begin to compromise on what we do with the 11 or more million folks that are here illegally, and perhaps allow DACA to exist. So, you have to have a compromise there. And also in the immigration, we need to begin to have an ideological vetting, and that it's not a right to come to the U.S. These diversity programs or lotteries, it should not be random at who comes to the United States. It should be those who are seeking American freedom, American principles that share our social contracts. It was bizarre to see Tim Kaine tweet today that, well, if we allowed immigration from Iran, that somehow that would support the Iranian people. Huh? That doesn't make any sense. You support those who share our values, but they're trying to fix their own country. It's not about coming to the United States. And those who do need to escape, like from places like Syria and elsewhere where they've had no other options, then we need to vet against jihadists and Islamists, et cetera. It needs to be a whole of government approach to where we don't just say, well, yes, maybe they need some human rights solution, but that solution has to be married with a sharing of our values. We can't bring in communists and other types of ideologues that don't share our values, and the immigration reform has to include that. I mean, still today, the immigration paperwork asks you, are you or have you ever been a supporter of the Communist Party? That made sense in the Cold War, and we need to impose similar types of restrictions in this global war against jihad.
All right. He is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, co-founder of the Muslim Reform Movement, former U.S. Navy lieutenant commander, and the author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Dr. Jasser, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate being on.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.